In fact, we began our conversation talking about sexual fantasies. I would like to go back to that a little bit. Can you tell me from your experience, share what are some of the common sexual fantasies which women have?
Yeah, so a lot of us are fantasizing about BDSM.
BDSM.
A lot of us are fantasizing about being sexually submissive.
Has it
And
got anything to do with the 50 Shades of Grey's popularity? Uh,
so interesting. What I think it's kind of the other way around. I think the popularity, it struck a chord. So I think that that's why it was so popular, was because so many women were thinking about this, but there was no acceptable mainstream depiction of it. And I will say that 50 Shades of Grey is a very inaccurate depiction of what healthy BDSM
True.
actually looks like.
Completely agree. Yeah.
But it was the number one selling book of the last decade. I mean, think about that. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And so what is that saying? If we think back to, okay, what is it about this fantasy that turns me on? What emotional need am I meeting through this fantasy? The fact that 96% of women, 93% of women have fantasized about being sexually dominated, what does that tell us? Here's what I think, and this is supported by the research too, is that now in this day and age, we as women are having to make more decisions than we ever have.
Exactly.
We have more decision-making responsibility than we have ever had. And as a result, we are craving something very different in our fantasies, which is for someone else to make the decisions for us, for us to not have to caretake anyone else. So, yes, that book, when that came out, that stirred something in our collective conscience as women. Yeah, wow, that would be nice. Where this is just, I just have to follow these rules and that's how this works, right? And so what is a common fantasy? That's a very, very common fantasy. And this can be particularly troubling for people who are like, I'm such an empowered woman outside of the bedroom.
True. True.
And why is it that I want to be degraded or,
True.
in the bedroom? Well, it's precisely why. It's precisely because you are empowered that you're craving something very different.
So even for a feminist, it is perfectly okay and normal to have a submissive fantasy.
In fact, it's going to be more common.
It's going
more
to be
common.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah. For progressive or liberal folks, we find that power differentials are more common fantasies because that's more taboo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To people who tend to be more egalitarian in their viewpoints.
Can we say the same thing with forced sex or rape fantasies also? What does that signify?
Yeah. So first, those can be really troubling for people, and more than half of women have had them at some point. So if you are listening to this, watching this, and you've had one, know that you're in the majority. So there could be a lot of things at play here. For some people who have survived trauma, this can be our brain's way of wanting to restage the trauma so that we can work through it. We are, in a sense, reenacting it, but putting ourselves in the director's chair this time. So that's one thing. Say you're not a trauma survivor, though. What is it about this that you're fantasizing about? Well, let's take a step back and not see this as a rape fantasy. And I know that's typically what we call them. But a rape fantasy would be that while you are actually, as a woman, you are walking down a desolate street at night, you are fantasizing about a stranger coming out and attacking you. Most of us are not thinking about that. So this is pretend, right? So this is what we would, play. It's so we could call this a forced seduction fantasy, consensual non-consent. But what is it that appeals to us? For some people, it can be like, oh, the thought that I'm just so irresistible to this other person. That turns me on, that they just can't even control themselves. That turns me on. For other people, it could be that because of their cultural or religious upbringing, they feel uncomfortable expressing their own sexual desires. So in this pretend world, they don't have a choice. This was done to me. I had no say in this.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.